Today's topics are going to be spicy as just so spicy. Today's stream is going to be so spicy. But buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to issue 4. First segment of our show is a segment I like to call the Backlog Attacklog, in which I viciously attack a stack of comics that has been sitting in my office for way too long and try to make a dent in it. Some of these are a little dated, but either I find them interesting or compelling and I want to talk about them, and this is my show, so this is what I do. I'm going to be really sad when I'm completely caught up on comic books and this segment goes away. I feel like that's going to be just the saddest thing in the entire world. But what can we do? First up, we've got Impact Winter, an Image comic that I bothered to put in a Mylar bag. You'll have to forgive some of that shine. Impact Winter is apparently based off of a popular Audible series, and I didn't know that when I picked it up. I picked this up actually while I was in Leavenworth, Washington. There's this cute little comic book store down there called Krampus Comics and Games. This one caught my eye, so I grabbed it because I love vampires, and there was clearly a vampire on the cover. Impact Winter is about a comet hitting Earth and essentially coating it in darkness. A point that we're at in the comic, it's been a year since the sun has been like kind of covered by this blanket or whatever you want to call it. It's a group of people in jolly old England trying to survive. I really like the art. I also like how gritty it is at places and some of the action sequences. Overall, it's not bad, but I don't know if I'm going to be adding it to my subscription list because it gives like very major young adult fiction vibes. If you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then you don't. Now, there's nothing wrong with YA fiction. It's just not for me. I had the same issue with Children of Blood and Bone because that book was so heavily lauded, and then reading through it, I just could not get into it because I'm more into the actual science fiction fantasy, sci-fi fantasy. I'm not very much into the YA version of it. Is there a chosen one? Yes, to answer your question, which is part of why there's YA vibes. And once again, I don't want to shit on the comic. There's a lot redeemable about it. But for me, that's why I could never really get into Hunger Games and stuff like that. Why I really don't like Harry Potter. Now I have other reasons to also dislike Harry Potter. Those things never really spoke to me because I never was into YA stuff. We've got AntMan. This is a little bit older. I think there's a few issues of this out now, but I wanted to grab it just to see how it is. This comic is actually in the vintage style. I mean, it is told in that kind of campy 60s style where the villains are ridiculous. The colors are very like hyper saturated, which I kind of like. And it delves into some of the past relationships between characters that we might not have known about in the Ant-Man mythos. It also has this Assassin's Creed vibe, because there's like this strange animus-like contraption that is part of it. Delving into Ant-Man's past, it's going to set up the lore of the Antastic Four. Not the Fantastic Four, the Antastic Four. If you like the old Batmans and like the really campy style, you're going to love this. The villains are hilarious because one of the villains turns people old with a gun. I'm not kidding. That's like his power. Another villain is a window washer. If he pours his bucket on you, you become paralyzed. You can't move because his window washer fluid is a paralytic agent. Another dude plays a saxophone and makes people dream of their worst nightmares. Just ridiculous, old-timey nonsense. It's one of those things, if you love it, it's great. If it's not your vibe, it's not your vibe. I enjoyed it. But it's going to apparently set up the relationships between Janet Van Dyne, Hank Pym, Scott Lang, and the the Fantastic Four and how that kind of develops into a team. So if you want to get a better sense of Ant-Man and what Ant-Man comics are like, check it out. It's really fun, and it's not a super serious or deep comic or one that requires a lot of comic knowledge to read. This next comic is the opposite of that. This is not a light read at all. It's actually a very crunchy read, but it's probably one of the most gorgeous comics I've read in a while. This comic is called It doesn't have the name on the cover. Something Henge? StarHenge? I think it's StarHenge. It's a heavy sci-fi comic. It's really interesting. I might have to actually add it to my rotation. I just grabbed it off the shelf because I need more backstory comics to read. So now I might have to try to track down the couple that I've missed. Basically, Earth is at war with this really strange alien race. What I really love about it is that this alien race is super creepy, and they are the antithesis of humanity. So because humans wear exosuits and prosthetics and stuff like that in the future, these androids will wear pieces of humans as their intimidation tactic. So you'll see a robot with a human skull on his face and stuff. Really creepy the way they've designed the antagonists. So humankind is kind of falling apart or is at war with this, and you cut between people from the past / the future, but they talk about how all time happens at once. Even the narrator tells you, even though this is in the past, it's happening right now. The world building in this comic is insane. I really like their lore of how humankind develops in the future. I love their lore of how magic plays a role in science fiction. In this case, the art is utterly stunning. But much because I also love Seven to Eternity, much like that, this comic is what I would call not a light read. So if you are looking for something more fun or turn your brain off type of thing, probably not this. The pacing is okay, but the art is absolutely gorgeous. And the premise is fun to wrap your head around. So I think I might be following this in the future. If you want me to, let me know. I have no way of keeping track with a live chat. So I guess when this makes its way to YouTube, comment there, because that's an easier way for me to count how many people give a fuck if I continue reading a comic or not. Moving on into the backlog. So I got this because I realized I actually didn't know very much about this character because this character died so early on when I was reading the X-Men, but I picked up the giant size X-Men Thunderbird. And apparently this is written by a wrestler, Nyla Rose from the AEW, which I thought was cool too. This comic is one of those that I feel like mediocre dudes on YouTube would rip apart because it makes them uncomfortable. And it was uncomfortable, but in a good way. It actually delves into the past of this character and how he was unceremoniously killed and how his death didn't really mean anything. It actually addresses it, how he died and nothing really changed. It delves into his past and addresses why this character would be disenfranchised and some of the inconsistencies in his writing. And they also talk about some of Professor X's not so great past, of how every single person that's come across Thunderbird, whether it's the US government or Professor X, wanted to basically use him for their own means. So when the X-Men bring him back to life, because that's a whole thing with the X-Men comics right now. If you need to know more about it, check out some of the last bagged and boarded issues. But when they bring him back to life, he doesn't feel really attached to them, and he actually goes back to his reservation because he feels used and discarded by the X-Men, which I understand. The comic goes into him balancing being indigenous versus being a mutant and what balancing those identities is like. But ultimately, he comes to this acceptance that it doesn't really matter that he's both, because whether he's a mutant or whether he's indigenous, he's always been vilified by the government and tested on and locked up and imprisoned and had legislation that targets just him based on his mutant identity and his indigenous identity, which I thought was like really sad, but also really meaningful. It's really food for thought. And I feel like they've done a good job of actually writing a character that would talk about something like that. How his anger is very much justified. He's an angry character, but he has every reason to be, if that makes sense, because what has the world done for him? I think it's a one shot, but if you're interested in learning about the Thunderbird character, I recommend picking it up. I only recently learned about indigenous people legally, with every accordance of the law, occupying Alcatraz Island, and how they were very unjustly bullied into leaving. I recommend looking that up. And if you're like, what do you mean legislation that just targets indigenous people? Highly recommend, like, before you go, everything gets political. Bro, there's no comic more political than the X-Men. But highly recommend doing your own research. This is my favorite of this week, so I wonder if I want to talk about it last. This is my pick of the week, and it's not new. It's old. They're up to, I think, issue 9 now. Rick Remender. I don't think Rick Remender has ever written something I don't like. But A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance. Holy smokes. I freaking love this comic. It's so freaking good. So much of it is told non-verbally, which once again, I love when comics do that because it's what the medium is good for. The art, freaking stunning, gorgeous ass book. The premise, also just like disgustingly amazing. I absolutely love it. It's brilliant. It's breathtaking. It's perfect. It should be a movie with Don Lee, if I'm being honest. It really should be. Look at this. This is why I was drawn to it. Look at this. I love the way this story is told. I understand that a lot more are out and I am very behind. So if anyone spoils this for me, Nolan's going to ban you. Very like rooted in reality, normal, kind of everyday guy that's going about his day. And you learn things about his character just based off of mundane, everyday interactions. Essentially, there is a couple that is brutally murdered and he happens to come upon the scene. I think it's heavily implied he's an ex-assassin that is now trying to use his dark web contacts and resources to save people that are about to be murdered and killed. If you are a fan of gory hitman style movies, like things like John Wick, or the first thing that came to my mind, The Raid, read this. It's so good. I love it. It's my pick of the week. I'm going to be tracking down all of the other issues and reading them this week, and I'll report back. I saw the art and I saw the cover and I saw Rick Remender's name on it. I got it knowing based off of that I was probably going to like it, and I was not disappointed. So that's my pick of the week. My pick of the week is from months ago. Bronze, when are you gonna get your shit together? Okay, hot this week. Why don't I have notes on this? Death to the Mutants. What is this, number 2? I think we're out to number 2 now, or maybe it's number 1 and Judgment Day's on number 2. I think I liked this oh, you know what, I put this in a cheap sleeve instead of in a Mylar sleeve. See, this is a Mylar sleeve. Hold up, let me hide my notes. Don't read my notes. Those are for me. This is a Mylar sleeve, which is an archival sleeve. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're higher quality and better at preserving your comics. This is a normal poly sleeve, okay? I put it in one of these. That tells me that past Bronze clearly didn't think this was shit. So, because most number 1s I will put in the archival sleeves. So me not having notes for this is probably just me being like, eh. Me not putting it in the nice sleeve also means I'm like, eh. So I'm going to say this was I haven't really been enjoying this event. I've been trying to read through it just because it is the big Marvel event right now, but I'm not going to lie and say I'm happy about it because I'm not. It's not very poggers. Okay, moving on. I picked this up, I think, on sheer curiosity. I was actually surprised to see it in my comics this week because I wasn't expecting it. But I actually got one of the Dark Horse Star Wars comics. Now, for those of you that know, a lot of the Star Wars comics are now being printed by Marvel because Marvel and Disney are in bed together. But this one is a Disney Star Wars comic by Dark Horse. It's called Star Wars Hyperspace Stories and is obviously a jump to the past with Princess Leia, a younger Anakin, and of course Obi-Wan Kenobi back when training Anakin. Now, this is a huge departure tone-wise and art-wise from the normal Marvel Star Wars comics. I just have to get this out there. I have always found young Anakin, especially from the prequels, to be really freaking annoying. Because he's always like, oh, master, you always want me to do this. I'm not going to do that. And he's like very inept, but is a know-it-all and embodies everything that's annoying about teenagers. This is turned up to the nth degree in this comic. So if you are like me and you can't stand that whiny bitch, I would recommend passing on this because he is a whiny bitch times 10 in this book. I do think this is a great comic for children. It's easy to understand. The pacing is really interesting. It's tied in pretty well to the movies. It has a lot of really recognizable characters, and the tone and the way in which it's told is great for kids, unlike some of the Marvel Star Wars comics that might be a bit much for young children. So I would recommend it for that. It also has a really cute Wookiee child that I liked. A really adorable Wookiee child. So that's kind of my review on it. I don't think I'm going to continue reading it, but if I had a younger niece or nephew that was nerdy, I would give this to them. But my younger niece is into TikTok and Chanel. So I don't know. Kids these days grow up crazy quickly. Okay. I might be biased because I feel like every single week I'm talking about one alien comic or another, but I did check out the new Alien comic. First of all, look at this art. How do I not check it out? Alien is probably one of my favorite franchises of all time. And I loved this first issue of this sort of new arc they're going out on. I know last time I talked about the Alien comic, I was talking about the Spinners storyline, which is this very anti-technology cult religion that is set up on a planet called, I think, Eurydice, and how Weyland-Yutani just fucked them all over. If you missed that and you wanted to jump in, this is a great place to jump in, and it recaps some of the events that have happened up until now. I love how quickly in the first comic they established the premise of what this run is going to be versus the Predator comic didn't really grab me that way. There is a planet that's responsible for feeding like billions of people, and there's been a nuclear reactor meltdown on this planet. Okay, you following? Now, there is another Weyland-Yutani holding where they are doing very illegal experiments. It's a completely artificial planet that they've made themselves, and they were doing inhumane things like future human gene splicing, all kinds of stuff that's very illegal, and they're doing it in deep space on this holding so that they're immune to terrestrial law. And on that planet, which has since been overrun by the bioweapons division, cough, cough, aliens. It's xenomorphs. There's xenomorphs. They were developing a injection or a technology that would allow humans to be very resistant to radiation. Now, they've basically approached a group of synthetics that used to be known as the Steel Team, which I love. Not SEAL Team, Steel Team 6 or whatever. And they were promised their freedom or their humanness, I don't know what you want to call it, in return for doing a bunch of missions for the government. They were betrayed. They're hiding and living in the wilds on their own. They completely obliterate the military team sent to retrieve them. Completely obliterate them. Rip their heads off. It's very violent. Do not read these comics if you're not okay with violence. All of them are violent. And finally, like, the leader guy in a very 90s action fashion is like, I knew you wouldn't listen to me unless I came in like this, but I've got a proposal for you. And they're like, the government fucked us over. And he's like, listen, if you do this job, I will give every synthetic who wants to an actual citizenship. Your rights will be acknowledged and you'll be a human for all intents and purposes if you do this. So think about not what you're doing for yourself, what you're doing for all synthetic kind. And they go for it because they're very foolish, but they are going to go to an infested planet to retrieve this injection so that the farmers can continue farming and feeding half of the galaxy by being radiation resistant or what have you. Otherwise, their entire supply line is going to collapse. The reason that they need to send Steel Team versus any other team is their data suggests that xenomorphs don't really notice or mark the passing of the comings and goings of synthetics. They don't really care about synthetics. Now, obviously, this has to change. Obviously, we know something's going to go south. There's no way this team of synthetics, who have a lot of personality and look very cool, mind you, is going to go down, retrieve this sample, and come back unmolested by the xenomorphs. I'm just saying, I love the premise, and I love the idea that it's going to be an all-synthetic team. There's no way this is going to be as cut and dried the way they claim it is. And that's what I love about these comics. They always throw you a curveball. Delving deeper into the sci-fi realm, as it were, I wanted to take a moment to talk about Batman Beyond Neo Year. Our boy Terry McGinnis looks so good. Oh my goodness, I love him. This comic leans into the cyberpunk of it all quite a bit. In this, Gotham is basically alive because you have to remember Batman Beyond is taking place in the distant future. There's software technology, AI is everywhere. And McGinnis has to basically team up with this very weird hive mind to try to take out the city. The city's alive and it has these people infected with these nanobots that can control them and can turn any human at any time into the Sword of Gotham, which is like basically Gotham's protector, and tries to thwart Terry McGinnis at every turn. Also in Batman Neo Year, Bruce Wayne is dead. And so a lot of this comic actually talks about Bruce Wayne and how Terry isn't really ready to say goodbye, how he's having a lot of trouble navigating the loss of his mentor, the loss of this grumpy old man that made him Batman Beyond, and also talking about what that man meant to different people. And my favorite part in this comic is actually he's talking to this police officer and he's talking about Bruce fought as Batman till he died. And even then he fought off injustice with like his cane. He fought until he died. And yet the city's more enshrouded and enveloped in darkness than it ever was. What was it all for? If every year the crime rate goes up, what was it for? And the officer says, you know, personally, I never liked Batman. I thought that the whole vigilante thing always had way too much collateral damage and wasn't an efficient way of doing anything. But then she says, my dad was always a big fan. And I think like what Batman is not a symbol of darkness or fear, but a symbol of continuing to fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds. That's what Batman signified to her dad. This symbol of somebody that gets knocked down. All of Gotham witnesses him get knocked down multiple times, and he still gets up and he still keeps fighting. And it reminds the people in Gotham to keep fighting, even when they get knocked down. That what Batman really symbolizes is tenacity. And I loved that. I thought it was really cool. I love this comic's take on it, and I love seeing Terry McGinnis navigate how to be his own Batman without a Bruce Wayne there to help him. It's really sad, but it's also really good. And I wore my Batman shirt in honor of it. Batman Beyond has always been like my favorite thing, my favorite part of the Batman universe. And I will always love Terry McGinnis. Will always be like my favorite Batman. All right. The name of this comic is stupid. Technically, I don't know if this is new enough to, you know what? I'm going to say it's hot this week. Leave me alone. Flavor Girls. This name is dumb, but it's forgiven because they literally address in the comic that the name is stupid. The art for this comic, freaking stunning. Absolutely stunning. It's published by Archaia. I don't read very many comics by them. If you are into like Super Sentai, Power Rangers, Sailor Moon, that genre, Magical Girl, you're going to love this. Human beings having to deal with an alien invasion, and then you have the Flavor Girls, which are Earth's protectors. That's not their actual name. That's just the name that everyone else calls them. And they actually acknowledge that it's a stupid name and they hate it. The story is mostly told from the POV of one girl who becomes a Flavor Girl in the very first comic, and she has the power of pineapple, and each of them have a different fruit that they symbolize, and that fruit like means something deep, and they're all granted power by Mother Earth to fight the alien menace. Even though it sounds very campy, it's actually dark in places, and I liked it. It gave me big like Sailor Moon vibes, but in a more modernized way. And I really liked how some of the characters were written. They all have very different approaches and styles to being these Earth's mightiest protectors and rangers. My favorite one is one who like drinks all the time and is angry. And at one point she even tells the new girl like, oh, hey, you gotta stay hydrated. She hands her a flask and it's just full of whiskey. They're written with a lot of personality and each one of them is very different. So Flavor Girls, it was cute. It was fun and the art was amazing. I like fun stuff like that too. Last comic, once again, this is new enough. Daredevil #2. This is the follow-up to, I think, was it Devil's Reign? And I'm just going to say this. There is, I believe, a new villain, or maybe just new to me, but I believe he's new, in this comic that I really like. And if you're new to Daredevil, this is actually a really great way to get a crash course in all of the past comics and lore of Daredevil, because this new villain believes he's the voice of God and he can make horrible things happen by willing them to happen. But in return, that's what makes Daredevil a superhero. So if you're familiar with Unbreakable, the M. Night Shyamalan classic, I'm calling it a classic. If you don't agree, no one cares. You're wrong. And in that, it's like this villain, Glass, creates all these calamities to find like the one superhero, right? And that's what this is like. This person has basically known Foggy and Matt since they were in college, and he claims that God speaks to him, and he has these sort of delusions of God speaking to me, and in order for you to become Daredevil, I have to do certain things to pull the strings, like running into this man who will suddenly get the idea to put a bomb on this train, or happening to bump into the police officer who's in charge of a hostage situation, and then he's going to shoot Elektra's dad. Like little things like that eventually turn Matthew Murdock into Daredevil. And it gets into Matt's own relationship with God and relationship with his faith as a good Catholic boy, and how that is counterbalanced against this guy who truly believes he's the voice of God and he's like creating the best version of Daredevil. He has like almost domino levels of luck because he has this blind faith in God. He'll just fall backwards off of a scaffolding 70 stories up and he will get caught by a random hook so he doesn't fall to his death. And he's such a great foe for Daredevil to fight against. And they do a lot of these flashbacks saying every place in Daredevil's like history and in becoming Daredevil where he intervened and made him a better hero. And I think those throwbacks and stuff are really good for newbies because this comic doesn't assume that you know all of that. So if you're like, oh, there's a new Daredevil show coming up. I wish I knew more about Daredevil. I wish I knew more about Elektra. I wish I knew more about the Hand. This is a really great comic to dive in because it does give you more context for what this character has gone through and where he might potentially be going in the future. So there is that. Those are all the comics I read this week. There's more even than this. I didn't talk about all of them, but those are the ones that stood out. Now for everyone's favorite segment of the week, the segment that inevitably is one day going to get me canceled. This is a segment where I complain about something to do with nerd or nerd culture or other people that are complaining about something to do with nerd or nerd culture. And I just want to give this week's award for just being annoying to MCU Wanda Stans. Fans of Wanda, Scarlet Witch are just freaking intolerable. They're probably just some of the most annoying stans I've ever seen. A lot of people complain about K-pop stans, but I think K-pop stans at least kind of leave well enough alone, whereas like Scarlet Witch fans are just annoying and they're everywhere. And of course, this week they came up in a major way because there has been a lot of conversation this week about casting. Ariel is black and I don't care. I'm going to keep it a buck. I always thought Little Mermaid was mid. Even if Little Mermaid wasn't, I don't think that this mermaid being white or black significantly impacts the story. However, there was a large number of people online that started to get just super upset over this casting. And this spawned a larger discussion and a very valid one of, well, characters get race swapped all the time. We don't see this kind of backlash. And that's where the Wanda stans got involved. And I got to tell you, I fucking hate these people. But before we get into that, this was the image that was liked by 600,000 people. So you don't have to dig deep to find it. Kind of discusses how other characters have been race swapped, that this backlash is really only being put on Ariel, even though the ancient one, Wanda Maximoff, all this, these were written off and not really discussed. Ariel is where we draw the line in the sand, even though, once again, I don't even think a lot of the people complaining are even going to go see this movie. I'm not going to. Once again, not because I'm against the casting, but this movie's for little girls, right? I'm sorry. Bane's exclusion there was also interesting, but I think they were focusing on MCU stuff or Disney stuff specifically. Bane is another one that people said this character was supposed to be based off of a luchador, and they cast Tom Hardy. I think the best Bane we've gotten to date is in the Arkham games. Tell me I'm wrong. You can't, because I'm right. But of course, people had to jump on this and hone in on Wanda because Wanda stans are just annoying. Let's talk about Wanda's origins, okay? One is she's the child of Magda and, of course, Magneto. And when Magda is pregnant, she goes to this mountain, which was actually in the Multiverse of Madness movie. She goes to that mountain, whose name I can't think of right now. Wundagore. Sorry. It's just such a silly name. So she goes there, has her kid. Fast forward. Wanda grows up with the Maximoffs, Django and fake fan. Django, and I'm sure someone will look it up and put it in chat in a second here. But she grows up with the Maximovs, who are Romani. Also, her mom is originally Romani. Magda is Romani. Her parents, the Maximovs, are both Romani, and because of this, Wanda's sort of upbringing is as a marginalized woman that's driven out of a lot of different places. At one point, she even lashes out and causes like this fire. Her people are constantly being pushed out of places because they're not wanted, and they're vilified by a lot of Europe. So the character is Romani. No matter what way you spin it, that's who she is. Now, in the MCU, they decided to say she was from Sokovia and joins a neo-Nazi group because Tony Stark drops a bomb on her. She gets exposed to an Infinity Stone, and with her powers becomes the Scarlet, which is a completely culture stripped, completely different version of that character. Now, you can make the argument it's a different writing, it's a different version of the character, but the nods that they make to that lore are what I find to be frustrating. For example, when in WandaVision they reference her Halloween costume and they say Sokovian fortune teller. The fortune teller bit is a stereotype of Romani people. So in some ways, they almost still reference it or still act like that's somewhat true. I don't even know how to describe it. There's a lot of arguments to make, but arguing that Scarlet Witch, that Wanda Maximoff is white, is probably the most head-ass argument of all of them. It doesn't help that Elizabeth Olsen, the person who plays this character, also has used this word, which is largely considered a slur. I'm going to use it for academic purposes here, but I would otherwise not use this word. Even though Romani people are South Asian and I'm South Asian, it's not a nice word. But she says in an interview, no, for the film, that world is very specific, so it's almost like hospitalish. And the way that we designed costume and character is based off these two kids being on their own and using whatever they can to their best ability. Like if they see a street vendor, they just grab something off the street vendor. So it hints to Eastern Europe, but it's also kind of this vagabond feel as well. I don't want to say it, but like even there, that's a stereotype that they all steal and they're all bad people, and it's apparently referenced throughout her design, but yet you have a white woman playing her. And then she was asked, how do you feel about the look and the characteristics of the way you portrayed the character compared to how she was depicted earlier in the comic books? And she said, because it's the origin, we're not superheroes yet. So what we could start with is in the comics where it says that they're from Sokovia and that they're blank kids, things like that we took on. And she says it pretty cavalierly in multiple places.
So Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver basically... they're like vagabonds. They are kind of gypsies in Eastern Europe, and they have just had to use their own resources to get on. And the way
so like this is where the lore doesn't add up, because if we were saying, well, in this version of Scarlet Witch or Wanda, she's Sokovian, but that's not what they're saying. She herself says multiple times that she's basically playing a Romani person. But then a Romani isn't cast in that role. A white girl is cast in that role. And that's the part I have an issue with. Because if they had just written her in this version to be Sokovian, I would have been like, okay, whatever. But the fact that they did write, design, and reference a Romani background and then go on to cast Elizabeth Olsen is a bit strange, and yet we didn't see this huge backlash when she was cast. However, anytime people bring this up, they get bombarded by these types of accounts where like the profile picture is almost always a picture of Scarlet Witch. They always have a I am Scarlet Witch or Lizzie's Olsen or Lizzie's Witch or Wanda's Elizabeth Olsen, Lizzie Olsen the best, you know, these kinds of cringe ass accounts like holy shit, get a job. But they wrote, this is the first time I've heard that the G word is used as a slur. I had no idea it was a derogatory term, and at the time in her earlier interviews, she probably had no idea either. I'm not trying to defend her as they defend her, but we got to see her side too. But after that host called her out on using the word, I would have thought she might have took that into account and not used it anymore. But seeing as there's 2021 proof, she obviously hasn't, which is deeply unsettling, and I hope she learns from this all and does better. And yet your profile picture is still Scarlet Witch image and you're still caping for her. So did it work? Probably not. Probably not. Seeing the tweets and replies to this very valid critique of the casting is ludicrous. To me, it's funny that so many comic book accounts, there is a subset of very mediocre looking men who make comic book videos on YouTube that would have had something to say about it, if that makes sense. But it doesn't just end there. This is not the only reason I find Wanda fans to be annoying. You might be like, Bronze, okay, we get it. That's one thing. Girl, no, they're annoying every day in every single way, okay? First of all, they hate each other. I don't know if you knew this. Marvel announced on September 14th that there's going to be a new Scarlet Witch. The cover looks amazing. I'm ready for this series. Now look under here. The best Wanda getting a solo. Now let me tell you, this shit fucking made me laugh. I would be lying if I said I didn't laugh. Mostly because of what Elizabeth Olsen's face is doing down here. The comments are crazy because they're just arguing back and forth of which stands are better. The comic Wanda stands or the MCU Wanda stands and da-da-da-da-da. So first of all, I think I'm allowed to hate Wanda stands because they don't even like each other. They hate each other. If you hate yourselves, I think I'm also allowed to hate you. So then there spawned an entire debate on which Wanda was better. The Wanda from the comics or the Wanda from the MCU. And which fans were better. There's more, chat. There's fucking more. Did you see the Superman versus Wanda arguments? This has been a week-long debate of Superman versus Scarlet Witch. A week-long debate. And you would think, is this spawned by a new WandaVision show or a new Wanda movie? No, they just have nothing to do. Whether Superman's speed would help him or Wanda's powers would help her, whether she could make the sun go away. And once again, people act like I go digging for this stuff. No, this is just one tweet of many that has 30,000 likes. 30,000. And this person wrote, Wanda can defeat Superman with, of course, this iconic clip. Which spawned into a whole debate of, you skipped the clip 3 seconds later where America Chavez says that she can't beat her. And here's the thing, guys. I'm going to settle this debate for you once and for all. Okay. Ready? Wanda can't beat Superman because Wanda can't even beat her own demons. All of these conversations about Wanda tend to assume that she is mentally stable, and she is not. America Chavez defeats her just by showing her her kids. It's pretty cut and dried. I think Wanda would defeat herself. This is how it's rolled out in the comics. This is how it's rolled out in the MCU. She's not a stable person. A therapist could defeat Wanda. So therefore, Superman is out of the question. Superman is freaking OP as hell. Do you know how upset I was when I found out Superman is faster than the Flash? That's the Flash's whole thing. And Superman is faster than him. The idea that you think, you truly believe that she could beat him is wild because that's why most of you hate Superman. Every time I talk about Superman comics, so many people are like, I just don't like him. He's too perfect. He's too perfect. Okay, so he would beat Wanda. No. Then it's like your freaking third eye activates and you're like, well, no, let us look at the weaknesses. He can only operate in the presence of the sun. And so if he was teleported to a place where the sun didn't exist or the sun was extinguished, then clearly Wanda would be. But you just said he's OP. You just said he's too perfect. You just said that's why nobody likes Superman and Superman can't be successful because he's too perfect. He's too strong. He's too good. Oh, but now you're saying Wanda could beat him. Shut up. Superman could just fly away and her own depression would kick her ass. She would be sitting there like, all right, time to fight my demons. Oh, damn. My demons got hands. And she would sit her ass back down because Wanda has always been that character. All of y'all assume that she's smart and capable of rational thinking and all this stuff. Even if we just go off the MCU, if she is so smart and she's capable of planning so far in ahead, why the hell is she walking after America Chavez, dragging her broken leg behind her? Like a freaking zombie. You couldn't even chase down a 15-year-old. And you're supposed to chase down Superman? You couldn't even fix your own leg with magic. But you can chase down Superman. It's foolish. Foolish. If you have Elizabeth Olsen as your profile picture, don't at me. Because I want you to know right now, I hope that your crops don't flourish. I hope every plant in your house dies. And I hope every time you go to the movies, you have somebody sitting in front of you, fidgeting with their wrapper, like, for the entire movie. Okay? Wanda Stans are annoying. So annoying. This has been bagged and boarded. Tune in next week. Tune in next week where I have no viewers because I pissed off everybody that loves Wanda. That's the end of the show. That's it. That's all I got.